Welcome to the Soft Life with Sadie Baddies. Sadie Baddies is the antidote to mental health stigma, and this podcast is hosted by yours truly, Priscilla O. Agyeman. We are a virtual sanctuary centering Black and multiracial people, and we prioritize the mental and emotional nourishment that is the foundation of collective healing in our communities. Thank you for being here. Happy Tuesday, baddies. Welcome back to the Soft Life. I hope that you're doing well this morning or today or whenever you decide to listen to this episode and tune in and join the conversation. So, let's talk about last week real quick. Last week, we dropped an episode about dealing with microaggressions. And let me just say, I kind of expected it. And then I also kind of didn't expect some of the feedback that we got in the comments was a little wild, it was a little crazy. Let's just say the January 6th Thursday came out. There was some people that were not comfortable or not happy with the conversation being had, specifically about owning your name and being proud of where you come from and not letting people mispronounce your name. Somehow that got misconstrued, and a lot of it was just xenophobic, to be quite honest. So if you were in the comment section and you were supporting and just helping to bring light and shed light, just know that I appreciate you and thank you for supporting and just being responsible for the truth and being able to share our truth as Black people and people of color. And honestly, if conversations about race make you uncomfortable, that's good. That's a good thing, because guess what? There's nothing that compares to the discomfort of talking about race versus actually dealing with racism in real life. So yeah, that was a little, got a little spicy, but again, I appreciate you if you were supporting and shared the content from last week, because I think microaggressions are so deeply rooted in the fabric of our everyday lives that it can be brushed off as something that's just offensive or annoying, but it's much deeper than that. So definitely check out that episode if you haven't already. I also want to share an announcement that next Tuesday, March 7th, we are going to be on a very exciting panel discussion with the Webby Awards. So, the Webby Awards, in partnership with Omidia Network, are hosting a virtual event on March 7th at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. And the topic is all about building an inclusive internet and asking the question, how do we build communities and products online that are inclusive? So, this is the Webby Awards' latest event in their event series, and we will explore crucial steps to thoughtfully carve out spaces and cultivate a sense of belonging across creator spaces, product development, and infrastructure. This is going to be such an amazing conversation. I'm very excited to be on this panel discussion. It's virtual, so you can join anywhere in the world. Again, the time is Tuesday, March 7th at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. I will obviously link the RSVP in our show notes. And I would love to see you there. Pull up, especially if you come from the podcast and you RSVP. I would love to see you there and just get to talk about this a really important topic, as the internet and social media are constantly changing and shifting. This conversation could not be more timely. And thank you to the Webby Awards for sponsoring this virtual event. And last but not least, I want to talk about our most recent feature from our friends over at Sustainable Baddie. We had an awesome article written by Natasha Lopez. Natasha, if you're listening, thank you again for this write-up. It's so beautiful. It's actually one of my favorite features that we've had about Sadie Baddies, because it just goes more into depth about not just our origin story, but why community, and both virtual and in real life, is the future, and how it impacts mental health and our well-being. I just love the way that this was written and portrayed. So we'll also link that article in the show notes. I love Sustainable Baddie. They are such an amazing organization and brand that is really shifting the conversation about sustainability in our communities, both online and offline. Okay, so let's get into today's topic. I want to talk about how a lot of us might know what depression is and might have an understanding, but let's dive into high functioning depression and what that really means. So, high functioning depression isn't a medical term per se, but rather it's the way that mental health professionals typically describe the disorder of depression and how it exhibits in individuals. I also want to be clear that the term high functioning is not meant to be ableist. It's not meant to be offensive. However, this is the term that's most familiar in the mental health and clinical settings. And it is the term that is most likely to be identified by folks who are discussing mental health topics. So, for the sake of familiarity, we will be referring to this as high functioning depression. But again, I just want to remind you that this is not meant to take away from any other conditions or create a binary of high functioning and low functioning. The clinical term for high functioning depression is actually called dysmethia. And people who are said to have high functioning depression are able to go about their day to day tasks, accomplish their goals, and interact with loved ones on a daily basis, all while being burdened by their mental state. A misconception of depression is that you can just snap out of it or that something caused you to feel depressed. And this was said by a psychologist named Catherine Moore, who is a psychologist at Providence St. John's Child and Family Development Center in Santa Monica, California. And she also adds, when you are clinically depressed, you feel very sad or hopeless for no external reason. Depression can be more of a low grade chronic unhappiness with life, or it can be intense feelings of hopelessness and negative thoughts about yourself and your life. It's also important to understand that sadness and depression are not the same thing. Everyone experiences sadness at some point in their lives, and it's typically a temporary emotion based off a specific life event, such as loss or trauma or a drastic change in your life. However, depression is a chronic, often lifelong condition caused by structural, psychosocial imbalances, and also genetics can play a part in the role of depression. Dr. Mendez, another psychologist, also writes that depression involves periods of hopelessness, lethargy, emptiness, helplessness, irritability, and problems focusing and concentrating. And before we dive in deeper, I want to share a disclaimer that I am not a licensed mental health professional. I am not a psychologist or a therapist. This information and this insight is based off evidence that's available online and available to the public, as well as my own lived experiences, which are also completely valid when talking about mental health. And I just want to encourage you that if you are struggling, to please visit our website, studybaddies.com/resources, where we have a laundry list of mental health resources that are available to you. And yeah, let's continue diving deep into this topic. So, if you've been watching the show Harlem on Amazon Prime, I recently got into this show. I was kind of watching it like on and off. I watched a couple episodes and then I got sidetracked and was probably watching Insecure or something else. But I started rewatching it courtesy of my friend Steph. And this is such a great show. I mean, for so many reasons. It's about four Black women that all live in Harlem, New York, which, ironically, I also live here in Harlem, and Harlem is my neighborhood and my home. And they live and work in Harlem. They're creatives, they're entrepreneurs, they're educators, businesswomen, and they all have their own backstories, and they come from different family backgrounds and dynamics and upbringings. So, in season 2 of Harlem, um, the episode is actually called Out of the Deadpan and Into the Fire. So this is season 2, episode 6. One of the main characters, her name is Quinn, and she's played by the actress Grace Byers. She goes through a lot of transitions in her personal life. She's going through a transition of questioning herself, her goals, her career goals, what she wants out of life. She's also going through a metamorphosis of her sexuality and opening up to discover what she truly wants out of love and relationships. And um she's going through a lot of personal changes in her life, but even though on the external side she's going through a lot of changes, there's this undercurrent of her being really really unhappy, but it almost has nothing to do what's going on externally in her life and everything to do with what's going on inside. And as the show goes on and as the episode plays out, you realize that Quinn is not okay. Like, she's going through it. She's going through a hard time. It's almost undetectable by her friends because she is the bubbly person. She's kind of like the mom of the group in a way. She's the person that people can lean on. She's the person that people rely on a lot. And she's the strong friend. In my opinion, out of this group, I mean, they're all strong and smart women, but Quinn has like this strength that I think can be taken advantage of in some ways. And as the show goes on, you realize like she's really going through a hard time, and she hits rock bottom, and she's going through a depressive episode, and there's like a slow build to it. Um, and then you realize like, wow, she's been suffering so much, and even her friends are not aware of what's going on with her because she hides it so well. And I was amazed at how well this episode in particular portrayed what high functioning depression feels like and what it looks like from a social point of view, from a personal point of view, and how, you can be known as the strong friend, or you can be that go to person for everyone in your life. But sometimes when you're suffering, it's so difficult to ask for help because one of the biggest hurdles is having people see you and understand you and say, "Hey, I know I don't look like I'm depressed, but I am. I really am." And almost having to convince people that you are suffering and you're going through a really difficult time, or not even just a period of time. Like, this has been your experience for years and years, but just it's so hard for people to get an understanding of why you're suffering, because sometimes there's no real reason. Sometimes it's such an overwhelming experience because there's no pinpoint, there's not necessarily like a beginning or end to it. It's just kind of this fluid, vague period of your life, or it makes you question if it's valid, and it makes you question if what you're experiencing is real. Later on, and I don't want to spoil the show or the episodes for anyone who's not caught up or wants to watch, but I will say that later on she does explore um taking medication for her depression and dealing with the stigma that comes with it. So again, I think that this episode just it sparked me to have this conversation in a more in an updated way, because I've talked about depression a lot ever since we've started this brand and this platform. And it's always going to be a conversation that we're going to have, because the reality is a lot of people live with depression. So this is an ongoing conversation. This episode in particular really just it sparked it sparked this conversation for me. And I also want to share, my experience with my first depressive episode and why it was so hard for me to ask for help. And I spoke about this a bit in the first episode, converting your fear into your purpose. And for those who are new or are not listening to the episodes chronologically, which is totally fine, I'm gonna just kind of rewind and talk about my experience with my first depressive episode and how I knew it was time to ask for help. So about 6 years ago now, about 6 years ago, I was in grad school for the first time, and I was living in New York by myself. I had two roommates and I was doing school full time. I didn't have a job. I was single and I was dating, and it just I was in a place in my life where I felt very I didn't feel grounded. I didn't feel particularly stable because even though I had, been going to school and I'm in school full time, I didn't know what I was going to do afterwards. That was kind of just my next step to the next step. I didn't have a plan essentially. And as I mentioned, I was single at the time and I was dating and I was feeling really um just underwhelmed by my dating life at that time. I was just feeling very frustrated, feeling not seen, not heard, and just choosing people that were not good for me, quite frankly. um I slowly but surely, in the beginning of the year, I slipped into a depressive episode because it was a slow build. It wasn't like all of a sudden one day I was just like, came crashing down. It was a very, very slow build over time of me ignoring my feelings, ignoring the feelings of feeling overwhelmed, ignoring the feelings of loneliness, hopelessness, sadness that just consumed me. And so little by little, I felt it building up, but I didn't think it was that big of a deal because I'm like, oh, well, this is just life. I'm an adult. I'm 24 years old, and this is how life is. So I definitely downplayed it, but things got worse. Things got really bad. I came to a point where I just kind of stopped living. Like I stopped trying to do anything. And that's so unlike me. If you know me and you know who I am, I'm quite the opposite of that. And so I felt like I had lost my lust for life. I lost the excitement. I lost that little energy that you have that helps you to get up in the morning. I lost that. I don't know where it went, but it just slipped away, and little by little I felt myself kind of feeling like I was in a hole, and I was kind of locked away in my room. It's not like anyone locked me in there, but I had just kind of gave up on life essentially. I just stayed in my room for, I think it was like 3 or 4 days in a row. Like I didn't come out of my room. I didn't shower, which again is not like me. I'm a super clean freak, and so for me to not shower is like, to anyone that knows me, that's like, what? What do you mean? Um I was not really eating. I think I was eating enough to not like make myself feel sick. Like I guess I food was not a priority to me. I didn't care about food. I didn't care about what I was eating. I was just crying. I was just like bawling my eyes out, crying so much, and then I would feel numb, and then I would cry again, and then it was just like this really dark, 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 dark place. And I felt so alone. I was living in New York, so I was away from my family. Even though my family was close by in New Jersey, I didn't feel comfortable asking for help, because I was judging myself so hard. I was judging myself so much, and I wasn't opening up to them. I wasn't opening up to my family or my friends because I felt like, well, if I'm judging myself this way, imagine how they're going to judge me. And I was projecting that self judgment outwards and just feeling like, well, no one's going to understand me. This is not like me. This is so like out of character for me, and I don't have to explain myself and all these things. And so I just really didn't feel comfortable opening up to my family and my friends. I also was just kind of not answering my phone, which again is not like me. I was just doing a lot of things that were outside of my character. I also had a lot of stigma and shame about mental health. I didn't know anything about talking about my mental health. I didn't really have the language. I didn't have the language to understand what I was feeling. And there was so much stigma that I felt attached to my feelings because I'm like, girl, there's nothing to complain about. You are in graduate school. you're going, you're doing your thing, I guess. Like you're living in New York, you're paying your rent, you're doing what you need to do. Like you're just being a 24-year-old grad student. Like what else do you need to do? But I couldn't shake the fact that I wasn't worthy. I didn't feel like I was worthy enough, and I just felt very ashamed of the way I was feeling. Um and I didn't really have a clear understanding about the signs or the symptoms of what I was going through. And this is like 6 years ago, so people really weren't talking about mental health like they are now or like they are today, and there was not really a lot of mental health platforms that were talking about this in the way that I felt like I could be seen. Although I did try to kind of find something on the internet, or like, something beyond WebMD that could kind of validate how I was feeling, I couldn't find anything. And I just felt so alone. I didn't have anyone that was like, I know what you're going through. And even if I did have someone at the time, I wasn't opening up. So there was no way for someone to even know that I needed help at the time. And, eventually one of my close, close, close friends realized that I was like just kind of disappearing. Like I wasn't showing up, I wasn't going to class. And she came over and she was like, you know, maybe you should talk to someone. And Ray, if you're listening, this I'm talking about you. And I just again I'm so grateful that you saw me in that moment and you saw that I needed help. And I, eventually got the courage to go to therapy. And through my graduate school program, we had free mental health counseling in grad school. And honestly, if I was not in grad school, I will just say right now, I probably wouldn't have gone to therapy, and I wouldn't have tried, because if it wasn't free, I wouldn't have gone, because there was no way for me to pay for it at the time. But I signed up. I went to my first therapy session. I was trying to talk myself out of going for so long, but eventually I just decided to show up. I put my name down on the paper. I was so embarrassed. I was like wearing all black and I just like felt so embarrassed for having to go to the psychiatrist. But that's what I needed at the time. I needed help. And if I didn't have the help that I got, I wouldn't be here today. So I'm just grateful that, despite that really dark experience and that period of time, because it was ongoing, I was able to slowly but surely listen to God, listen to my family and my friends that were supporting me at the time, and push through and started going to therapy for the first time, and it changed my life. um so I want to talk about some of the signs that it's time to ask for help, and how high functioning depression, how it looks in black women in particular, and why it is so different in how it shows up in black women and people of color. So some signs that it's time to ask for help, or some of the ways that high functioning depression shows up in our lives. Hold on, I'm gonna grab some tea. So some signs that it's time to ask for help is that you might feel hopeless often, or cry a lot without any real reason or any concrete reason. You might do well enough at work or school, but it is a challenge, and focusing on task is difficult. So, you might be that person who's able to still do their job, or still kind of, show up to work or school, but it's still challenging and it feels like pulling teeth. Another sign is that you might have to force yourself to engage in social activities when you would rather just withdraw and be home. You feel a little bit down most of the time. Like most of the time, you just feel down and unhappy. There's always almost there's almost always a mood of a low mood that's always present, and it feels like you will never get relief. And when you do feel happy, it feels fleeting and it doesn't last long enough. Another emotional sign is you feeling bad about yourself, feeling unworthy, or as if you don't deserve to feel happy or be liked by others. You may also feel tired all the time, even if you get enough or if you even if you get enough sleep, or you might get a lot of sleep to try to sleep off those feelings. You might judge yourself and think that you're being lazy, but truly you just can't summon the energy to do more than is necessary to function at a normal level. And you're doing everything you're supposed to do, like go to school or keep the house clean or take care of your kids, but everything feels like a monumental effort. So these are just some of the signs. I mean, there's so many more, but these are some of the signs that um of someone who might be struggling with high functioning depression. It's like, again, that low grade mood and that low grade feeling of unworthiness, of unhappiness, of feeling sad and just hopeless, but still kind of carrying on day by day and doing your daily routine or going through your daily task. So, I also want to speak specifically about how depression shows up in Black women, because more and more psychologists and more mental health professionals are having this conversation, because we're seeing that in different groups of people, depression or mental health disorders can show up differently. So, Nicole Perez, who is a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner and postdoctoral associate at NYU College of Nursing, and she's also the author of the study published in Nursing Research. She wrote, based on our findings, and this is about an article on depression in Black women, which I'll also link in the show notes if you want to read it. It's a great article. But she wrote, based on our findings, it's possible that healthcare providers may miss depression symptoms in Black women, resulting in underdiagnosis and undertreatment. Black women in the study were shown to have greater depressive symptoms, and they were more likely to report somatic symptoms. So somatic meaning feelings versus just thinking. So somatic and somatic in the body. So the symptoms that Black women were reported included fatigue, insomnia, decreased sex drive, and self critical symptoms such as self hate, self blame, rather than stereotypical depression symptoms such as feelings of hopelessness or depressed mood. They also reported experiencing anhedonia, which is an inability to experience pleasure, as well as irritability. And furthermore, notably, symptoms experienced by Black women may not be adequately assessed in a clinical practice using standard screening tools, especially on those that focus on feeling depressed without addressing somatic and self critical symptoms. So there's a gap that's happening when healthcare providers screen for depression in Black women, because they're focusing more on the thought patterns, the feelings of hopelessness or depressed mood, rather than the physical and somatic symptoms such as fatigue, not being able to sleep, not having a sex drive, and then also those feelings of self hate and self blame. Those are also key screening factors that healthcare professionals need to start looking at more widely, because if you are only looking at one singular way in how someone shows up or how depression shows up in someone based on your clinical evidence, right? So if your clinical evidence is based on, largely people who are not Black or people who are not diverse, a diverse population, sometimes you might get a different perception, versus what this study is showing, that no, actually Black women, they do experience depression and they do suffer with depression However, it might show up differently and the symptoms might be a little bit differently. Um, and I also want to focus on the irritability factor. I think the irritability is such a underlooked symptom, especially because if your stereotype as a black woman, which we know by and large black women are stereotyped to have an attitude or to be rude or to be withdrawn or just n- whatever the stereotype is, if your stereotype includes irritability, I'm sure that type of symptom gets a lot less compassion than someone who's feeling lonely or someone who's feeling just an overwhelming wave of sadness and hopelessness. Irritability is that suppressed emotion, that underbelly of feeling overwhelmed. And I personally feel like when I'm irritable, I feel overwhelmed. I'm not able to process my feelings, and that's why everything bothers me. I could feel overstimulated, I could feel ignored, I could feel overwhelmed, but that irritability is what shows up. And I think that's such an important factor in how depression shows up in black women. And it's like, maybe take a step back and consider the person in your life, or the black woman in your life, or the black person in your life who might be irritable or might have like these feelings of this fatigue or this insomnia. If you add irritability on top of that, maybe from their lack of sleep, from their lack of care that they're receiving, mentally, physically, emotionally, I would be irritable too. um so I think that this study is really important, and it really helps to highlight how depression can look different, especially in black women. And truthfully, we need to look beyond looking sad. We need to look beyond asking or seeing if someone's depressed based on how they look, and telling someone, "But you don't look sad," or, "Oh, wow, but you don't look that way." It takes away the validity of their experience. And the more we step away from assuming someone doesn't appear or look depressed based on how they look, the more we'll be able to continue removing that stigma. And I think a prime example of someone that didn't necessarily look depressed, but definitely was Chesley Christ, who was the 2019 Miss USA. And she was an amazing person that had an MBA and was a lawyer and, was a pageant queen. And unfortunately, we lost her and she died by suicide last year. And the world was stunned. The world was shocked about how we lost this amazing, bright, beautiful woman. Oh my God, but she doesn't look depressed. She doesn't look depressed. But that's the whole point, is that your depression does not always show up on your face. Just because you can carry the load well doesn't mean that it's not heavy. There is no reward for how gracefully we can suffer. And to me, high functioning is almost a blanket term for, high functioning to what? Are we high functioning to see how well we can thrive in a hyper productive capitalistic society that, we can prove how much we're ignoring our emotional and mental health needs, and that's what makes us high functioning? I don't think that high functioning should be a badge of honor. I don't think that high functioning should be a reward of how much we're suffering with our mental health. And I really encourage us as a community and as individuals to move away from telling someone, or saying that that person does not look depressed. I mean, I could say the same thing about Twitch, who also died by suicide last year. And I I think that it's really, I think whenever we have someone in entertainment, or public figures that die by suicide, I think there's always this shock that happens, and a lot of times it's because it's the person you never expect, and that's the whole point. the point is that depression is a it's a slow burn, and it can last for years and years and years. There's people who've been living with depression for almost their whole adult lives, and it's chronic. And it doesn't always show up in such an obvious way. And and then there's acute depression, which means that you are experiencing depression for a period of time in your life, but through whether it's medication or therapy or somatic healing, you're able to, or you're receiving the care and the treatment that you need that can help you to transition out of that acute depression. And I personally, I mean, after speaking to a psychiatrist and a therapist, um, for years, I realized, and my psychiatrist confirmed I was going through like an acute depressive or acute depression at the time. So having that understanding and knowing that, okay, this was a period of time in my life, that doesn't mean it's never going to happen again. And if it does happen again, if I do go through a depressive episode again, thankfully I'm able to know how to pivot, and I understand I have the tools and I have resources available to help me through that period of my life. And it's not something that I'm terrified of anymore, even though it was the darkest time in my life. I don't feel that fear because I know that there's help, there's hope on the other side. And of course, I want to, share some resources, but I just want to, remind you that if you are going through, if you feel like you might be someone that is going through depression or high functioning depression, I want you to remember that you're not alone. And whether you look like you're depressed or not, whether you are the only person that knows you're depressed or everyone in your family, or you're carrying this load by yourself, just know that you're not alone. And I want to share some resources through Sadi Baddies. So we have so many resources on our website. If you go to saddybaddies.com/resources, we have a list of resources. Some, are therapy focused, but some are not. Some are other uh, tools and guides that we share. And one of them being the Depression Resource Guide, which is on our website. And this is a great guide. It really goes in depth about depression. And I one thing that I know is that when I understand something better, when I have the language for it, it helps me to navigate it so much more. And that's exactly what Sadi Baddie's purpose is to help you navigate through. And the Soft Life podcast, obviously, like, we really want to help you navigate through some of life's challenges and stresses, and land on them with a softer touch and a more compassionate way of approaching it. So, the Depression Resource Guide is on our website, as well as the Samaritan Suicide Prevention Center. And this is actually the only community based suicide prevention organization that's open 24 hours in New York City. And we have a list of other amazing resources on our website. So definitely check that out. And of course, Therapy for Black Girls is an amazing resource if you are looking specifically for a Black therapist. This is a great directory and guide. I've used this myself years ago, and it's helped me to find a great therapist. So that's always a great resource. Also, Alma Therapy and Open Path Collective Therapy is provides a sliding scale of sessions that I believe are between $30 to $60 a session, which is significantly less than the market, you know, price for therapy. And I cringe saying market price for therapy because it's like, why is there even such a thing? But anyway, I encourage you to check out that resource because it is definitely one of the more affordable options. And we do have a list of free or low cost resources through um, our website. And just as a tip, federally qualified healthcare centers in your state. Every state has a federally qualified healthcare center. There are a few, there's actually quite a few in New York. Um, and on the East Coast, those centers typically do offer therapy at a very, very discounted rate, or they're completely free from my understanding. So check those out too. And again, everything, all the research will be in our show notes. And last but not least, I wanted to just share some community care and self care because the two cannot exist without each other. And really just talking about how to support someone with high functioning depression or with depression. I think we always hear the phrase, check on your strong friend, check on your strong friend. But some of us don't have the language or the capacity to check on our strong friends. Some people check on their strong friends and then they don't have a follow-up. They don't know what to say after because they don't know how to talk about those uncomfortable feelings. And if you've ever talked to someone who is clinically depressed, those feelings are heavy. Those feelings of not wanting to be here are heavy, and that's not something that everybody can handle. And that's why I always say that you have to ask the person what they need, because maybe that person doesn't want to talk. Maybe that person just wants to cry. Maybe that person wants to have you sit with them and watch Real Housewives together on their couch. Like maybe that person just needs you to pick up their laundry, or maybe that person needs you to not judge them if they haven't showered for a couple days. And that's a whole nother topic about the stigma of like hygiene and cleanliness when you are depressed, and how we're so quick to judge people that might look disheveled or might look quote unquote unkempt, but you have no idea what they're going through. And so there's so many ways to show up for people. It doesn't always have to be you being on the listening end. Sometimes it's literally showing up with flowers at their door. Sometimes it's showing up and bringing food and soup, or sometimes it's showing up and helping them get in the shower. That's true community care. And I don't know if everybody has the capacity to do that, but that's the healing that we need. I don't think we have enough therapy slots in the world to help all of us get the help that we need. But if we can be there for each other and we can open our eyes and kind of take the individualism out of our daily lives every now and then and look around us and see collectively how we can support each other, that's true collective healing. So I really encourage you to look around you and to talk to your friend, talk to the friend in your group that has all everything together, that's the planner, that is strong, but that person might be going through a very hard time and you might not even know it. And that person could be someone who never gets asked, how are you? How are you really? And like truly asking that person how they are, you might be surprised that that person's been waiting for someone to ask them that for days, months, years. So check in, truly hold space, and not just offer, oh, hey, are you okay? No, I'm not. All right, that's it. End of conversation. It has to go deeper than that. It has to go deeper than that. And then also, don't be afraid to ask for help. Of course, asking for help is the hardest part, but that's the biggest step. And practicing somatic healing, so healing that's sensory based, whether it's the emotional freedom technique, also known as EFT. And I have a friend of mine, Lotus, who is an EFT practitioner, and she shares, step by step, guides of how to practice EFT. And she's great. Or it's called the tapping method. And community service is also an amazing way to connect with community, with where it's not focused on talking about your feelings per se, but you're part of a group, you're doing something for a social good. And I know for me, when I've gone through some of the hardest moments in my life, stepping outside of myself and doing community service has always been a way for me to feel grounded and rooted. And it's helped me to shift that perspective and kind of get out of that like dark space in a lot of ways. And just being in nature, being finding grounding practices that are effective. And Sadie Baddies is the whole point of Sadie Baddies is to remove this stigma surrounding mental health. But Sadie Baddies was started because I know that there's other people who may not look like they're depressed, and that's the whole point. Being You can be a baddie, you can be a bad bitch, you can be someone that's admirable, beautiful, lovable, joyful, but you can still be suffering, and or you can still be going through this emotional and mental turmoil, but that doesn't stop you from being a good person. Your symptoms of depression do not make you a bad person. It means that you need help. And I am overly optimistic, and I do hope that as we continue having conversations about mental health and we show up for each other, actually, you know our society is really requires so much healing from the damage that happens to us as a society, as a community. And a lot of it is not our fault, I'll say that much. I don't think it's a coincidence that we have the most depressed generation of people that we've ever had. I think that goes hand in hand with the way that our society is built, and how we are programmed, and how capitalism literally forces us out of bed and forces us into spaces that are maybe overwhelming for us. And I mean, I have so many thoughts about that. So maybe we'll do a part two of that episode. But I just again encourage you to check out the website, saddiebaddies.com, and share it with someone you know. Or, feel free to explore and discover some resources that could be helpful for you. But I'm sending you so much love, and stay soft. See you next week. To stay connected, join Saddie Baddies on Instagram, Pinterest, Twitter, and more, and sign up for our monthly newsletter on saddiebaddies.com to stay in the loop. Sending you hella love, and stay soft, baddie.